I'm not used to speaking behind a podium, so I don't know how I'm going to follow that, to be honest with you. Thank you. First of all, the introduction, I feel like I don't need to say anything now. She pretty much told my whole life story there. I want to thank you so much for having me at this very, very important event. I want to thank JFS and Michelle and Esther and the Levensons and everyone here who is here to support not only the recognition of the volunteers and the work that's already done at JFS, but the work that will continue on in honor of Eric. The Center of Hope, what could be better than that? So I want to tell you a little bit about myself. In 2010, after I had been diagnosed with breast cancer and I was in bed recovering from surgery, I was propped up very gingerly with those hospital pillow things. I was writing thank you notes. I looked around the room and I saw beautiful flowers and balloons, and I knew that downstairs in my kitchen were casseroles, and that my kids' carpools were taken care of, and that all I needed to do was try my best to recover from surgery and prepare for 9 months of chemotherapy. I live in Westchester, New York, and in the town that I lived in, which is similar to a community like Clifton and Passaic, when there's a tragedy, our community comes together to help. We stand up for each other. We do meal change. We support each other. And that's what we do. But as I was laying in bed writing these thank you notes, I felt angry. I felt angry. Now you might think, well, of course you were angry. You were diagnosed with cancer and you have all this horrible thing to look forward to, but that's not why I was angry. I was angry because I couldn't help but think, where had the casseroles and flowers and help and support been only a few years earlier when my son was desperately ill with mental illness? When my son, I have 3 children, I have 3 sons. My middle son was the most adorable, gregarious, funny little boy with tons of friends. Everyone wanted to be with my son. He was adventurous, he was creative, but sometime around first grade, things began to change. He began to become petrified of the school bus. All his friends were on the school bus. He had been on the school bus for a year and a half with no problems. He didn't have separation anxiety when he went to nursery school. He didn't have any signs that there would be any problem, but he became petrified of the school bus. And every day became a negotiation about how I'm going to get him on the school bus, or well, let's just drive him. It's not worth the negotiation. I was a young mother at the time, and frankly, parenting is hard. It doesn't come with a handbook. And sometimes everyone has a difficult kid, right? And we all have a difficult kid. So he was my kid, who was just a little more difficult. And I did what all mothers do. I read parenting books, and I met with my friends in playgroup, and I asked the teachers, how do I handle this? What do I do? How can I get him to stop being afraid of the school bus? Time went on, and other things began to happen. He became fearful of school, hated school suddenly. He hated the kids, he hated the teachers. My son, who was the soccer team goalie and in art classes and involved in all of the wonderful activities and Hebrew school and part of the local JCC, suddenly didn't want to do anything. And it became more and more difficult. In first grade, I went to the school psychologist because I didn't know what to do. And the school psychologist went and observed him in class and came back to me and said, "There's nothing wrong with your son, but I think mom maybe needs a little help, and you should go consider talking to someone." Well, maybe she was right. My husband told me I wasn't tough enough. I babied him. That was the problem. And I thought, well, maybe that's true, because you don't know. By the time my son was 8 years old, getting him out of bed was a daily struggle. And he became increasingly fragile. One day, he came home from school and he lay down on the couch, and he was my video game kid and my kid who was always busy going, and he laid down on the couch and he stared out the window for what seemed like hours without moving. And I went over to the couch and I sat down next to him and I put my hand, on his face and his forehead. Maybe he's sick, maybe there's something wrong. And he looked up at me with his big, brown, beautiful eyes, with crocodile tears streaming, and said, "Mommy, I just don't want to be alive anymore." And he was 8. At that point, I knew this wasn't just me not being a good mother. There was something going on. Finding help was difficult. Trying to figure out what to do was difficult. When he was at school, he was completely fine. And they looked at him and said, "He's adorable, he's fine, he's getting decent grades, there's nothing going on." But at home, he became increasingly fragile and increasingly irritable and agitated. And daily life became harder and harder. We did find therapy, had him in therapy for a year or two, had him tested, sought out any service we could possibly find. Ultimately, my son was diagnosed with anxiety and depression, and ultimately bipolar disorder. We tried for years to find the right doctors, the right medications, the right school district, the right school environment. He was probably in, I think, 5 schools in 2 years. We tried homeschooling. He was on dozens of medications. He gained 50 pounds and lost all of his friends. And our community seemed to unravel and just be stripped away from us. I didn't know that a child, for no apparent reason, could have a mental health disorder. I just didn't know. Kids from neighborhoods like mine, from families like mine, don't have these problems. If you love your children and you're good parents, what on earth would an 8-year-old have to be anxious about? Why would an 8-year-old, for no reason, not want to live anymore? It didn't make any sense. So what I know now is that we are not alone. 1 in 5 children in our country, throughout all socioeconomic stratospheres, it doesn't matter your religion, your race, 1 in 5 children struggle with a diagnosable mental health condition. That's 15 million children. I felt isolated and alone. I had no one. I didn't have a nester. Although, to be fair, our rabbis reached out to us, and I was too ashamed. I didn't know what to say. We live in a society and a culture of blame and shame and fear, misunderstanding and silence. We also live in a culture where a child's behavior is thought to be the direct result of parenting. We don't think of children as having a problem with their brain in especially a good-looking child, which I see pictures of Eric. What a handsome young man. I'm sure he was an adorable little boy. We don't think that there could possibly be anything going on in their brain that could cause behaviors other than parenting. So I always like to give the story. And even those of us who are in this business, we can't help it. We're a very judgmental society. We shouldn't be. We try not to be. We work on that, hopefully. But if we're in a grocery store and there's a small child having a complete tantrum on the floor, picture this, because the kid wants a lollipop. I want this lollipop now. No, I can't wait. I mean, how many times have we seen this? I don't know about you, the first thing we do is we turn to that mother and think, what's she gonna do? And no matter what that mother does, she's gonna be wrong. So if she gives him the lollipop, we think, well, no wonder that kid behaved that way. She spoils him, that's what it is. If she doesn't give him the lollipop, and she ignores him, we think, oh my God, maybe that mother's just completely abusive or neglectful. That mother neglects the child. No matter what she does, it's going to be very hard. Someone surrounding her might get it. There might be one person who looks at her and has a little sympathy and thinks, what is that kid doing? But most people are going to think about, what is she doing that's causing that kid to behave that way? We don't stop and think that perhaps that child has a serious anxiety disorder or a mood disorder or something else going on. And they needed food in the house. And I'll tell you that when my son could barely leave the house, no one was volunteering to go grocery shopping for me. I had to take him with me, and if that meant he had a complete meltdown, that's what it meant. I can't tell you how many times I've had to leave the grocery store with a full cart of groceries because my kid was flipping out because he couldn't take the stimulation and the anxiety and he just needed to be back home. I didn't really understand that's what was happening, but in retrospect, I know that that's what's happening. So my point is that we live in this culture where we assume that a child's behavior must be about parenting, first and foremost, maybe a little bit about schooling, maybe about social, maybe it's technology, maybe it's bullying. When the truth is that mental illness is 80% of the time, and there are a lot of studies that show this, genetic. Our brain controls every single thing we do. It controls my hand movement here, which I wish it would stop because I just talk with my hands, I can't help it. It controls our walking and our talking, and it controls our thoughts and our feelings and our behaviors. And that doesn't just start when we're adults. It starts at birth. It does. And if we don't know that a child can struggle with a mental health condition, then how can we help that child? You can't get help for a problem that you don't even know can exist. As a mother, we know something's off. When your child was 14, you know. But to figure it out when you don't have language for it, when you don't really know. I didn't have an Esther, and I didn't have a JFS to go to, and it took me a very, very long time. By the time my son was 12 years old, we had to make the very painful decision to send him to a residential treatment center. He was 12. He lived there for 2 years. We were all in intensive therapy for a very long time. But we are the lucky ones. We are so lucky because my son is now 21 years old, and he has more self-awareness in his pinky than most adults I know, because he has been struggling with this mental health disorder for a very long time. So why do I get up and tell you all of this? I believe, as I look back now, and that day that I was writing those thank you notes for my breast cancer and all of the wonderful gifts and support, that day it occurred to me, wait a minute, I remember when cancer was the C word. Some of you were too young to know that, but some of you remember that. Do you remember cancer was the C word? And it was embarrassing. And you certainly wouldn't stand up in front of a room and tell a whole room that you had breast cancer. And now, it's not only not a big deal, but the football players are wearing pink ribbons. It's everywhere you go. Everywhere you go. And that's because brave people stood up and said, no more. We will not be ashamed of having an illness that we can't help having. And as a result, they've changed the way everyone sees cancer and breast cancer. And those of you who are young in the room and don't remember when cancer was stigmatized, it was, ask your people who are older than you, it was highly stigmatized. So as I was writing these thank you notes, I thought, I have to help. We can make a difference. There are 2 million people in our country who are currently breast cancer survivors or are in treatment. There are 60 million American adults who struggle with mental illness. 50% of all lifetime cases of mental illness begin before the age of 14. If we want to help, we need to intervene earlier. We need to understand that children can struggle from mental health conditions. Treatment can work. Treatment gave Eric 14 years. There are things we can do, but we can't do anything if we refuse to talk about it, and if we refuse to open our hearts and minds to the families who are struggling with these issues. And everybody knows somebody. You might not know you know it. You might not know what they're dealing with, but everybody knows somebody. With those statistics, 1 in 5, 15 million children, everybody knows somebody. So one thing I want to really drive home here is how fortunate you are to have JFS, and how fortunate you are to have this center opening up. I have traveled all over the country. As you so wonderfully told everybody, I did actually write a movie that is a little plug. You can see it on Amazon. I take the movie and I travel the country and I talk about this. And I've talked at big conferences and small meetings, and I go all over the country. And everywhere I go, I am astonished at how little there is in the way of services. And so for you to have JFS here in Clifton and Passaic is really a gift, because there are so many places in the country, and I dare say even in Westchester, there were services, sort of, but I didn't know they existed until it was too late. And if you don't know something exists, you can't really avail yourself of it. And I'm sure you have that problem here sometimes. People go, wait, JFS does what? So I urge all of you in the room to, A, be grateful, which I'm sure that you are. I mean, I'm speaking to the people here who make this happen and who keep JFS running and keep the word out and raise the money and start these new programs. I want to tell you that it shouldn't be a secret, and that there are so many people who need the help, who desperately need the help, who are still struggling in silence, as Eric did and as your family did. And I want to live in a world where my son and his siblings are not ashamed of the fact that he has a condition he can't help any more than they would be ashamed if he had diabetes or asthma or any other chronic condition. Because the shame is what keeps us quiet and silent and prevents us from seeking help. It was the shame and the fear and the blame and the reaction I got from my community that caused us about a 7-year delay in getting the treatment he needed. And we were lucky. We were lucky. The statistics are it takes an average of 10 years from the onset of symptoms until you get a proper diagnosis. 10 years in the life of a young person is unimaginable. 10 years of not going to bar mitzvahs, of not being able to attend Hebrew school, of not being able to participate in childhood activities or activities that would be appropriate for a young adult. And it's because of the shame and the silence and the blame. And I do believe we can speak out about it and share our stories and make a difference. So I want to thank you. I want to thank your family. The struggle that you've been through is horrendous. And no family should feel what you've gone through, what I've gone through, and yet there are millions of us. And it's time we stand up and we do what we can. We develop centers. We speak across the country. We make movies, whatever. Do what you can. Volunteer. But most importantly, don't be ashamed. And don't let the people you love who surround you be ashamed either. Because they need your support. And I'm grateful to the JFS and for all the work that you do here. I hope that you continue to support it and that the Levenson Center for Hope continues to grow, as I'm sure it will, because there is a huge need in our country, and we need to always remember that. So thank you very much. I'm sure you guys are ready for dessert or something. You just see these beautiful cookies that were made. And thank you so much for having me.